InterActivate your teaching. Yesterday, we defined interactive learning. We talked about the rationale for teachers. We identified a lot of goals and also several suggested strategies. The first session is now available, by the way, on our website, the Language Center, as well as on our YouTube channel. So to start off today, I was thinking about how many times I've heard and felt such loss and compassion when one of my students would say to me, "Sorry, ma'am, I don't understand. I come from Telugu background." And here they are in an English medium college, struggling to grasp concepts and even friends. No matter what style and foundational pedagogy you've embraced, there's no denying the fact that language is learned through using and interacting. And most of us would agree that knowledge is built from experience. As we begin a new session today on supportive pedagogy, I want you all to remember Kolb's experiential learning cycle. Let me just put that on the screen in case you haven't seen it lately. Okay, this is from the 80s. You can apply this to your own learning experiences as well as your students to experience or experiment with something, collect the data and reflect, conceptualize, and then again, experiment. So I want you to keep this in mind in this session and over all three sessions. Today, Shannon and Tom are going to lead us through some approaches that will keep us focused on interaction and interactive learning. If true knowledge, if true knowledge comes from experience, we can be sure to trust the competence, extensive skills, and attention to detail of Shannon Smith. I've worked with her. Now she is an English language fellow at Maristella in Vijuana, and she always aims to improve her students' holistic proficiency and inculcate her activities into teachers' methods and approaches. And behind and beside every strong educator, or most strong educators, at least the ones that you're meeting on these 3 days, are behind us supportive husbands. Not only does she have that encouragement from her husband, but they also share the passion for training and teaching. Thomas Kral is an education consultant, as well as currently a PhD researcher, and his work is varied, but always includes interactive teaching and learning. We're honored to have this couple with us and for us to witness true collaboration. We often wonder, how can we collaborate? Now we're going to see it in action for this crucial element of teaching. I want to welcome Shannon and Tom to our screen, to our community, and I'll turn it over to you. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thanks, Vicki, for that great, warm welcome indeed. And kind words. I just want to say, yes, Tom, I'm really relying on him at this point because actually a lot of what we're doing tonight is in part his experience in doing online webinars. So I have to say and give him credit for a lot this evening. And yeah, he is every bit in his own right a teacher. And really we're happy to be here tonight to work with all of you and share what we've collaborated with in the last few days to get ready for this event.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for the amazing welcome from everybody, and it's great to see so many people joining us today. It's really a pleasure for me to be here and to kind of speak to all of you guys. I'm going to share my screen now so we can begin. So please be patient with me as I try to do this the right way. Okay, can everybody see?
Yes.
My screen, good, okay. All right, put it on slideshow mode. Okay, so is everyone ready? Can everyone see and hear? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. Okay, excellent. Yeah, so welcome everybody to day 2 of our webinar on interactive teaching. And we're basically going to pick up exactly where Mina left off yesterday, and we're going to get into more kind of specifics and more kind of practical ideas on how some of that kind of interactivity, which Mina talked about yesterday, can be applied in your lecture hall, in your classroom. You know, we tried to make this webinar as wide-ranging as possible. We have a large group of participants who are from very different disciplines. Some of you teach English literature, some of you teach chemistry, some of you teach social sciences. So there's a huge, and some of you are counselors, as I learned yesterday, and some of you are students. So there is a huge amount of experience and a variety of participants. So we are coming at it from the point of view of the English department, because that's the contact Shannon has in her college. But we've tried to also make it relevant for others as well. So anyways, thank you for joining, and I'm going to run down today's, basically the main points of what we're going to cover today, the topics, and tomorrow. So basically what we're going to do, so before we start, so we'll see where we go today. We've planned this for today and tomorrow, and we'll see how much we get through today, and we'll continue where we left off tomorrow. And we're trying to make this, because it is an interactive webinar about interactivity. We're trying to make it interactive. So please feel free to use the chat room. I have to turn on the, I can't see the chat room from, since I'm in slideshow mode. So
I can see it, so I'll watch it for you.
Okay, great, good, okay. So please feel free to interact in the chat room. I might turn off, I might stop sharing just to see what's going on in the chat room, if that's kind of a sensible thing to do. But anyways, let me run down the topics for the next 2 days. So as Vicky said in her introduction, we're talking a lot about English medium education, and that's a real challenge for many of the students at our colleges here in Andhra Pradesh. And so we're going to talk a little bit about student challenges with English medium education. This will be a segue into interactive lectures, actually what happens in the lecture hall itself, and how that can be some ideas on making that more interactive. And that's going to take quite a lot of time. That's going to be the largest section. And then we're going to move on to using visuals, visual aids and organizers, and get into pair work and group work and how that can be included into kind of lectures. And we'll already have started that in the interactive lectures, so they all kind of meld together anyway. And then we're going to pick up something that Mina mentioned yesterday, a little bit about critical thinking skills, Bloom's taxonomy, and how we can work with that framework to inform kind of lectures and tasks in your training and classrooms. Okay, sorry, just jumped ahead of myself there. Okay, so that's sort of a very rough plan for the next couple of days that we're together. So let's go ahead and start with student challenges with English medium instruction. So before we say anything, I'd like to hear from you. And so maybe try writing in the chat, see how that goes. And I'd like to hear from your side. What are some challenges that your students face, especially with English medium education and with their English medium studies? Okay, so I'll just give you about a minute to contemplate and write something in the chat. Vicky will inform us when something appears.
My students face hesitation, scarcity of vocabulary. I was thinking the same thing about vocabulary, mother tongue intrusion.
Oh, we figured out how to get the chat. I got the chat window up. My
Oh,
Zoom
good.
skills,
Okay.
even though I've done a lot of Zoom training, my Zoom skills are always developing. Okay, so we see pronunciation, sentence structure. Okay, so actual language skills there. So poor vocabulary, mother tongue intrusion. Intrusion sound is a it's quite a negative word. Okay, so we sometimes say language transfer, maybe. Sentence construction, inferiority complex, interesting, shy, yeah. Okay, lack of confidence. That's something that, I mean, I'm actually conducting research here on the use of English in higher education, and lack of confidence comes out very frequently. Low self-esteem, students hesitate to speak, basically to express themselves in English. English has a very high status, and people feel that they should be speaking it better than they do. Yeah, this is something that this is a real situation. Yeah. So Jane says sometimes they don't have good teachers in lower classes. It affects their pronunciation confidence. Yeah. Yeah. So many students come from either a private medium, English medium secondary school, which is maybe not such high quality. The English medium instruction isn't very good. Often it's not, there's not much of it in English. The exams might be in English, but the instruction isn't always in English. Or they come from Telugu medium.
Yeah, that's a good point, Amruta. That people,
Right.
they're still trying to translate in their mind. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's kind of like language transfer going on. But I want to kind of flag some of these up because we have to consider multilingualism as a strength of our students. So we have a multilingual student body, and that is a source of strength, and we have to see it as an advantage rather than a disadvantage. So, and we can talk a little bit about that. So they're good with grammar rules, struggle with comprehension and communication. Yeah. Okay, so all of what you are saying has implications, and I'll keep writing. Go ahead, and I'll go on to my next slide. And once I can, okay, good. Okay, so basically student challenges with English medium higher education. HE stands for English medium higher education. So many students have low proficiency, yeah? And for whatever reasons, they haven't had the access to English, the exposure to English, they haven't had very strong teachers, and they come into their college classroom that is English medium, and they struggle. They have a low level of proficiency. And that's interesting. Many of them are concentrating more on learning English than on the content of their course. So basically, this low level of proficiency has implications. There's a lack of comprehension of the key concepts. This leads to confusion, which leads to low confidence. It leads to, my notes are covered up there, low confidence and poor motivation, boredom in the classroom. Students don't know what's going on, and this leads to poor learning outcomes. Yeah. Students are often ill-prepared to be in an English medium setting. Yeah, so it's basically it's actually quite a simple situation. If the students don't have adequate English, they're not going to adequately understand what they need to do to do well in their studies. However, of course, the lecturers, the teachers have some agency which can support this situation and mitigate this problem. So, and this is where language supported pedagogy and strategies come in. So, so for lectures, and this is actually taken from literature from Fenton Smith and et al. And so basically, the literature says that lecturers in low proficiency English medium context should be assigning more project-based work, okay? So that means setting up groups to do tasks and projects as opposed to lectures. So we had a little bit on that yesterday. So it's just a few very practical, simple ideas like giving readings and tasks ahead of lecture. So assigning readings before the night before the lecture or the evening before, so that students can read what they need to read, and then they'll have that going into the lecture so that they're better able to absorb it. Provide multilingual support. So this is something probably many of you already do. So the college is a multilingual place. I besides going running at Maristella, I also sit in on some classes and kind of listen to what's going on around me. And it's a very multilingual place. We have lots of languages represented. In addition to Telugu and English, we have people speaking Hindi and Tamil and several other languages. So it is a multilingual place, and the teachers provide multilingual support. Unfortunately, this is often a bit illicit, and it's something that some teachers feel shouldn't be happening, but it's happening kind of unofficially. But this is something I support mainstreaming and making part of policy. At the moment, that's not the case, but hopefully it will become more legitimized at some point. Okay, and of course, just very simply speaking, slowly, clearly, so students understand. I don't want to spend too much time on these quite obvious points. Pausing, repeating, highlighting the most important points. Now, what we're going to talk about today is implementing student-centered learning, which the discussion we've already begun with Mina, and supporting meaning negotiation. So this idea that students need to understand the meaning much better of what the teacher, what the lecturer is saying. So we are going to spend a considerable amount of time in the next 2 days looking at these two last points. Okay, good. So let's move on to our kind of the largest section of our webinar, and this is about interactive lectures. Okay, lecturing more interactively. All right. So we have we've created kind of two kind of mock lectures, and I will introduce you to our two lecturers. There's Dr. Suresh, and Dr. Suresh is a traditional old school kind of lecturer. He likes to lecture. He is skeptical about trying new interactive ideas. but yeah, he's willing to give it a go, but quite reluctantly. Next to Dr. Suresh is Dr. Shanti. Dr. Shanti is far more open. She's a progressive lecturer who's really trying to develop her skills and increase her repertoire in her pedagogical approaches. So she's very open to new ideas, and we'll kind of see a few small case studies to illustrate the gap and the difference between these two kind of make-believe lectures. Okay, good. So we're using the example in some of these scenarios of Florence Nightingale, and you might wonder why we're using Florence Nightingale. This is a text that is assigned, I believe, to first-year students at Maristella College in their English literature class. So we thought we'd just use Florence Nightingale. It's the first one that came into mind when I was preparing this. So here's Dr. Suresh, and Dr. Suresh starts an introductory lecture about Florence Nightingale, the book they're about to read. And so there's Dr. Suresh lecturing. So Dr. Suresh begins, I'll be Dr. Suresh, I'll do his part, and you can just already start to recognize what the problem is. Yeah. So good morning, students. Today I'm going to introduce Florence Nightingale. Nightingale was an English social reformer, statistician, and the founder of modern nursing. She came to prominence while serving as a manager and a trainer of nurses during the Crimean War, in which she organized care for wounded soldiers at Constantinople. She significantly reduced death rates by improving hygiene and living standards. Nightingale gave nursing a favorable reputation and she became an icon of Victorian culture. Okay. So we see the students below, and they're confused, they're struggling, they haven't really understood much of Dr. Suresh's lecture so far. So this is not going very well. Okay, so what's going on here? What's the problem with this lecture? Okay, so I'll wait for a few seconds to see if anyone has any comments in the chat box. Okay, so Irene says lecture method there needs to be a warm-up session. Okay, good, all right. Good, okay, I mean, I think that's icebreaker, no context, students may not understand vocabulary. Okay, brilliant, so yeah, exactly. Okay, so I'm gonna continue. Okay, vocabulary. Okay, good.
Mulia has a question for you. Are you telling about how to speak English and its vocabulary? Am I right, sir? Or telling about?
I'm not sure I understand the question. No, I'm not. It's not about his English, it's about the delivery of his lecture, yeah. Okay, good, I think people are getting the idea, teacher-centered, it's okay, so it's a very teacher-centered approach, yeah. But like we said, many teachers teach this way, teachers only have 50-minute, in our college here, they have 50-minute sessions, and they just need to, kind of deliver their lecture, and this is often what happens. There's no interaction. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's. Okay. So I think people are making really good points. Okay. So yeah. So here are my kind of ideas for what they're worth. So yeah, there's no engagement, as some of you pointed out, with student knowledge or interest in the topic. No warmer, no kind of context setting. Just kind of go straight into the lecture. I mean, this is of course an extreme example. I don't think any lecturer would actually do exactly what Dr. Suresh is doing, but just to make this point, I'm making it in a rather extreme way. Not all my buttons aren't working very well. So he takes a very long speaking turn. Of course, the teachers are going to teach, they are going to impart information, but his speaking turn is quite long. He doesn't pause for the students to react or to clarify meaning. He doesn't, it's simply just relaying information. And then, yeah, the vocabulary he uses may not be familiar to many students. A social reformer, a founder, she came to prominence, favorable reputation, icon. You know, not all of these words are going to be familiar, or these terms are going to be familiar to students. And finally, the reference to some contexts may be unfamiliar. So the Crimean War, Constantinople, Victorian culture, this is quite removed from many students' lived experience. And they may not know. I mean, there's a war in Crimea, near Crimea now, but you know, yeah, it's distant. It's not in the here and now for the students. It's quite distant. So yeah, I think Dr. Suresh can do better. Yeah, as we agree. So yeah, and you can see I've highlighted in yellow the vocabulary that was potentially challenging, and in green the cultural references, and it's actually quite a large chunk of text there. Yeah, so basically the message here is that we as lecturers or as teachers need to be careful of what we say, and keep in mind that the students' first language isn't English, and many of them struggle to understand things. Okay, so I'm going to ask people to put themselves on mute because we hear some feedback.
We're trying to monitor that.
Okay, thanks, Vicky. Okay, so yeah, as you can see, it's quite a large chunk of the text that's not really suitable. So this is a better start. So, you know, Dr. Suresh says, okay, good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to introduce Florence Nightingale, right? She was a famous English nurse and statistician more than 150 years ago. She provided nursing care to wounded soldiers during wars in Eastern Europe. And she made 3 important changes. Okay, first, she improved hygiene and living standards for wounded soldiers and greatly reduced death rates. She made nursing a respected profession. And finally, thirdly, she promoted social justice for women. Okay. So, wow. So this is obviously a better start. The vocabulary is simplified. Yeah, so instead of came to prominence, she was famous, and that sort of thing. And then simplified context. Instead of Crimea or Constantinople, she talks about Eastern Europe. So if it's not necessary to focus on these kind of potentially confusing points, there's no need to mention them, and it's better to refer to a part of the world like Eastern Europe. Yeah, and something important as well that Dr. Suresh does there, it's signposting. Yeah, so a good lecture signposts, and here he signposts 3 important changes. Yeah, so and then that signals to the students that something that they need to pay attention. It's an effective way of emphasizing that particular point. Okay, good. So it's still Dr. Suresh. Dr. Suresh is kind of the traditional, old school sort of lecture. So, he's trying this out and he's doing better now. Okay, and then Dr. Suresh decides to sort of up his game a little bit, do even better. So this time he decides to put something on the board, to use his blackboard. So he puts some key vocabulary, some lexical items, and he He put some of the key parts of his lecture, on the board. He wants to maintain Crimea because he thinks it's interesting. He doesn't mention Constantinople. He wants to, mention Victorian culture, so fine. So this is what he does. He writes all this on the board before the lecture, and then when the students come in, he says, okay, guys, good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to introduce Florence Nightingale. Before I begin my lecture, look at the information on the board about her. Work with a partner and discuss these points. Okay, look up unfamiliar vocabulary if you're not sure. I'll give you 5 minutes. Okay, so it's already a changed situation, right? So now the students can see some of the words and unfamiliar concepts they're going to encounter before the lecture. They can discuss with a partner or with a small group. They can look up unfamiliar words, and then they're much better prepared to listen. Yeah. So it's only 5 minutes of his 50-minute lecture, but it could help quite a lot. Yeah. So these are some really simple, basic, just little tweaks, little changes that a lecturer can make to the delivery of their lecture in order to kind of support student understanding who might not have such strong English.
But Tom, people may be wondering, okay, this is fine and Dr. Suresh is doing better, but how can we actually get that interactive element into a lecture?
Okay, it's coming. Yeah, don't worry. Okay, Vicky's got her hand up. Vicky, do you have a question?
Yes, I do have a question. This idea of, so I want you to work with a partner or 3 or whatever and discuss these points. What do you do when they say, what do you mean discuss? There's no questions here. What do you want us to discuss? How do you help students discuss?
Okay, so it's coming. We've got this is this is Dr. Suresh. Dr. Suresh is still pretty old school, so
Okay.
Dr. Suresh hasn't figured that one out yet. Yeah, basically, yeah.
We can answer that
Students talk about what a social reformer is. Maybe they can speak in any language they want. So basically the classroom culture that we want to cultivate is that they look up these sorts of things on their phones, talk to their partners, figure out what a social reformer is, statistician they might or might not know, founder of modern nursing. So yeah, but it's a good question. Yeah, we need to cultivate this kind of partner work, self kind of study, because a lot of the students might be expecting to be subjected to the banking method, and yeah, this is empowering them a little bit to find out for themselves what these things mean ahead of the lecture, and this can be supported by the teacher. So it takes a bit of learner awareness and training for those who've not done this sort of thing before, if they're not used to it. So yeah, it's a relevant question, Vicky. Thanks. Good. Okay. So anyways, the point here is that the teacher is exposing the students to some words that he or she might identify as tricky, that are really important to the topic that they're teaching, such as social reformer, yeah, and founder of modern nursing. These are key words that they need to know and that are important for them to understand the topic of the lecture. So I think a lot of lectures feel that they don't really need to teach English, they need to just teach their subject and it's up to the students. But I kind of think that the teachers need to be a little bit sensitive to students who have weak English and to help support that, that weakness a little bit, and to help build up their knowledge of the key terminology at least. So yeah, good. So I'm going to move on because time is ticking. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Shannon, who's going to be the reform-minded teacher. So this is Dr. Shanti now, and she's also delivering a lecture about Florence Nightingale, but she uses a different approach. Okay, good. So
good morning. Today we are discussing Florence Nightingale. Raise your hand if you've heard of Florence Nightingale. Okay, thank you. Well, as you can see on the board, she's famous for her work as a nurse, but was also a statistician and advocate for women's rights. So look at the questions on the board and discuss them with your partner. So Dr. Shanti has a different kind of approach. And so just going back to the previous slide, we can see that there are two questions there that Dr. Shanti's written on the board and a photograph. And, you know, I think if you can provide students with a kind of visual or a picture, this makes them interested in the topic. It sets the scene for the topic, and it makes the students a little bit curious. So visuals are a little bit different than what Dr. Suresh did. Also, the questions on the board. Yeah, she's got two questions, and they're interesting questions. They're looking at them. What do you think? Going just back to critical thinking from yesterday, from Mina's lecture, and thinking about Bloom's taxonomy, we can see that the questions here are, you know, slightly challenging. So they're getting more into the higher order thinking skills, and they're asking students to do some, yeah, thinking, you know, a bit critically about this, how comparing healthcare to today's healthcare and maybe when Florence Nightingale lived, and getting them to think about maybe how her life was different than professional women nowadays. And that really sets the scene for the whole piece of work that the students are meant to read, the biography of that historic time, and gets them, places the students' minds in that era, in that particular era, which is essential for their understanding of the whole literary work. So yeah, so she's got critical thinking questions on the board, and she's also got visuals. Let's see what else. So we've got visuals, and yeah, so yeah, engaging students with the topic, raising hands. And this is also a good assessment for the teacher, just to see maybe how much they know. Do they know Florence Nightingale? Have they heard of her? And this helps the teacher maybe judge what she should or shouldn't focus more on in a lesson or a topic. So you can ask your students, what do you know about this? And then, yeah, the questions that we've discussed before about critical thinking.
okay.
Okay, yeah, going on, Dr. Shanti, she's heard of something called a KWL chart, and she wants to try it with this group, maybe a different group that she's teaching the same lesson to about Florence Nightingale. And yeah, just very quickly in the chat room, what do you think KWL stands for? Have some of you encountered this kind of visual organizer? Any thoughts? What does K stand for? What does W stand for? What does L stand for? Make a guess. Don't be shy. So Dr. Shanti writes this up on the board, a kind of table.
Before the lecture.
Before the lecture, yeah.
Yes, madam.
Any guesses?
Okay, so the chat room is suspiciously quiet, so maybe nobody has come across a KWL chart
Is it
before.
very?
Thank you, Amruta. Okay, lovely.
Amruta probably looked it up.
Okay, yeah. Okay, lovely. Thank you, Amrita. Yes. And
No, I did.
what I know. Yeah, exactly. So this is a nice kind of what we call a visual organizer, but it's also a nice way of getting students interested in the topic, engaged. It helps the teacher know what the students know again. So yeah, so at the beginning of the class, before the lecture, the teacher might ask the students, okay, what do you know about Florence Nightingale? What do you want to know? And then later, returning back to the same chart at the end of the lesson, the students can then say what they've learned. So that's the idea. And
yeah, it's sometimes what's nice to do for the after the brainstorming. So what they know now is just kind of often a collection of little facts that a group might know. The want to know, it's quite nice to ask groups of students to formulate questions about the topic that they have, things that they want to find out. So that's quite a nice way to do it. And it's good to give a task, like what are 3 things you want to know, so that they have a target, because sometimes students won't write anything. They might just sit there uncertain what to do or how to proceed. So yeah, it's good to be specific with this sort of task.
yeah, just to go along with what Tom has said, I think the next slide we've got, yeah. So basically, Dr. Shanti says, yes, before I start my lecture, please work in small groups, brainstorm what you know about Florence Nightingale, then think of 3 things you want to know about her. Write your notes in the chart, in chart form. After the lecture, we'll summarize what you've learned. And yeah, I think this already is getting into a more interactive type of format, because you're allowing the students to group together, to think about what they know, to formulate their questions together. So they're collaborating, and it's already making them more engaged with each other and with the lecture in a more interactive way. But yeah, there are, in my experience, there are obviously benefits, but there are some challenges as well. And just before I give my view from my experience of trying this out with Mars Stella students at my college, I'd just like to know from you what you think as experienced teachers and maybe aspiring teachers we have in our audience tonight, what you think might be the benefits of a KWL chart, and what might be some difficulties implementing it. Feel free to share a benefit or a challenge, whatever comes to mind in the chat box. Yeah. Yeah, so they're already thinking about the topic. Absolutely. Yeah, it gets them hooked right away into the topic. Thanks for that, Vicky. Yeah, thank you, Mina. Good for metacognition. Yeah, anything else? Yeah, like a roadmap. I like that. That's nice. Yeah, and how to navigate the lesson. Absolutely. Okay.
Any challenges, any problems you might see implementing something like this in your lecture?
Okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So we're getting a lot of benefits. Yeah, it is interesting. Absolutely, it's interesting. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, obviously it's very engaging for students and very interesting. And it invites the predictions that we need to hook students into the topic, to get them curious about the lecture. And when we predict something, we want to know the answer. And so there's a reason to listen. And that's really important, is, providing that reason, that rationale that students should actually listen to the lecture. So the prediction stage is really nice in that. What do you know? Also, it elicits curiosity and interest, and maybe the lecture will answer some of their questions, what they want to know. And it enables student reflection. What do they know? Have they heard of this woman? Should they have heard of this woman? So it enables them to engage with the topic that way. Also, for teachers, especially the last stage of the KWL chart, the learned section, what have you learned today? This provides a kind of formative assessment at the end of the lesson for the teacher to know what information the students were able to grasp from the lecture, what they retained, what they remember, or what they found interesting. Okay, now this doesn't come without some challenges. It seems like a really good idea, but when I tried to do this where I work, I ran into some difficulties, and one of them was time, because I was trying to do this in a 50-minute period, and it was, most of the time then what went to this, and actually I didn't really get around to what I wanted to do in the lecture. So yeah, time management is a big one. And I think looking back on that experience, I'd written the KWL chart up on the board, and I invited the students to write what they knew about the topic and what they wanted to know on the board. And and discussing this with Tom, just, kind of about this kind of critical classroom incident, maybe for me. He had a good idea about, students don't have to write it on the board. Maybe they can just write it in their notebook and make some notes, so that you don't have that big time dedicated, large amount of time dedicated to students having to get up and write on the board, which they found very challenging, in fact, because the students maybe weren't so sure of themselves. They weren't so sure of this method. It was a little bit different to what they were used to. So their expectations of what they should be doing in a lecture maybe was vastly different with me trying to do this KWL chart than they were used to. And so, I met with some resistance, in fact, and a lot of time just encouraging them to get up and write something. And it goes back to that, what Tom was talking about earlier, what are the challenges with interactive teaching? And I think it's really confidence, and maybe students being a little bit afraid to interact that way, for fear of being caught out for not knowing something in front of their peers. So we have to think about that.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to the contributions. I see them coming in. So I mean, the KWL chart, as people said, it helps with background knowledge, relate understanding. It makes students curious, like we said. It recalls their schemas, recalls past experiences, so it builds on their own kind of experience, which is always important. So it personalizes the topic, because it kind of starts with what they know already, recalls past experiences. So understanding the level of knowledge, it helps the teacher understand the level of knowledge of the students at the beginning and at the end, as we said. The lack of willingness to share, I think that's that might require some longer term work. It's not going to change all that, it's not going to happen successfully right away, and it might take 2 or 3 tries to kind of get it right. So some students aren't willing to share, they're reluctant, they're So as we said, we can have them do it just in pairs or small groups rather than in a public sort of way. So, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Good, and they'll be motivated to find out more what they know and tracking progress. And it's formative assessment isn't necessarily only for the teacher, but it's also for the students themselves. They're able to kind of see the progression of their own learning, and it kind of empowers them to take more responsibility for their own learning. Again, this takes a little bit of a paradigm shift on the learner's part, and that's something we need to support students with, to make them responsible for their own learning with our support, rather than just us giving them information as the the teachers. So yeah, so thank you to all those great comments. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, just one more interactive lecture technique, and this one is called using buzz groups, and we're going to try this. It's a really nice way to get some dialogue going, actually, in a lecture. And the process we're going to try here, we're going to try a very condensed version of this. So let's see what we need.
Okay, so just to say, we're going to be in breakout rooms, but not yet. So Vicky's going to assist with that. But before we go into a breakout room, there's a couple of tasks. So so the lecture. So Shannon's going to lecture, deliver a short lecture, and it's about the topic of education, which is relevant for our discussion here. And it's the transmission view of education versus the dialogic view of education. So your kind of pre-lecture task is to look at these two concepts, transmission and dialogic, two views of education that you'll hear about, and to kind of brainstorm, think about what you think the differences between these two. Some of you may know already, so you can share. For those who don't, you can also write your ideas or your guesses. So yeah, let's hear a couple of ideas in the chat box. What's the difference between these two views of education?
It's a nice review of Mina's presentation yesterday.
Irene has raised her hand. Yes, Irene, go ahead.
I'm not sure if I'm correct, but transmission would mean the lecture method, and you're just, giving just giving them the information, like filling the bucket up, if I were to remember the terminology from yesterday. But the dialogue view of education means interactive, where the students and the teacher is more like a scaffolder, and she's just scaffolding the groups and, helping them out, but they're creating their own knowledge, their own dialogue, they're talking to each other. There's a lot of peer interactions. And this is how I understood it.
Okay, great. So any other ideas before we, that was a nice summary. Thank you for that, Irene.
Can I say something?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Thank you very much. I think transmission is all about passing on information literally as it is, without engaging the learners, without finding out what they know, without trying to find out their experiences with the knowledge. But when it is their logic, the learners are engaged. You are pushing them and triggering their thoughts on what they know, how they engage with it. So it's more experiential than their logic, it's more experiential. But the transmission is more lecture, it's more passive. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Okay, thanks, Esther. So just because of time constraints, I think we should move on, because we're going to do a breakout group in a moment. But first, Shannon's going to deliver the lecture. And as she delivers the lecture, we're going to ask each of you, if possible, to take some notes. Yeah. So take notes on what you hear. It's just a very short, kind of a short lecture about this topic. You can see if these suggestions were the same or different. And after you make your notes, you're going to divide into breakout rooms and summarize what you have understood from the lecture. Okay, so I'll pass over to Shannon.
Okay, are you ready? In education, the role of learners is no longer seen as being mainly one in which students simply receive information transmitted to them by their lecturers or textbooks. Generally, the transmission view of teaching, in which students are seen as receivers of knowledge from teachers and lecturers, has come to be replaced with a view in which students are seen as needing to be actively engaged in the learning process. It is now generally recognized that learners need to be involved in processing, creating, and shaping knowledge. If students are to be actively engaged in learning, they need opportunities for participating in and contributing to classroom discourse. Thus, dialogic interaction between teachers and between students themselves is an important means by which students can become actively engaged in learning events.
Okay, so in a moment, Vicky is going to put you into breakout rooms, okay? Maybe something like 4 or 5 per group. Yeah, is that possible, Vicky?
Yes, working on it now.
Yeah, for about 3 minutes. And your task is to summarize what you have just heard, yeah? So just basically share your notes, what you've written and what you remember from this lecture. And after that, we're going to ask one of the groups to summarize it, a representative from one of the groups to summarize it for everybody, okay? And to try to remember, you know, as much as you can and summarize it for everyone. And then we will ask others to fill in any gaps or further details that they have noted. Okay? Good. So I'm going to stop sharing. Should I stop sharing? Is that the thing to do, Vicky?
You can. You don't have to, but you can. Yeah, I usually stop sharing when I do breakout rooms.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to open up all the rooms. Please look on your phone or your computer or your screen where it says join, and you just can click on the join button and then unmute in your group so that you can have a little discussion. Is that correct, Tom? Is that what you want?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm opening the rooms now.
We won't join you.
Interesting.
Okay, don't forget to
Okay.
tap the thing on your phone or click where it says join.
Join breakout room, please. I only have 2 people in room 2. If you say join room 2, that would be great. If you could join a couple of people in room 2. Nobody has joined room 1.
I was in room.
Amruta, is there Amruta, Josephine, Ravi Kumar, Pramila? Can you guys join room 1, please?
I joined room 1, but it just kicked me out.
It kicked you out.
Yes.
All right, let me see if I can put you in another group. I'm going to move you to group 2, see if that works, okay?
Okay.
I guess that worked. All right, anybody else need me? Pramila, do you need me to move you to another group? No, there are now 3 people in room 1, so How long do you want them to be in there?
Just, maybe just a couple.
Just a couple minutes, yeah. We'll let you know when,
All
yeah.
right.
Kind of running in.
Lavanya, Salishma. Are you guys not able to join the breakout rooms? Or did you not want to talk about the lecture?
Oh, we're not going to join one because we've delivered
No,
the
no,
lectures.
No, I was talking to the rest of the,
Oh, right, okay.
okay.
Sorry.
But you guys that are still in the main session here, you can give me some feedback. Is there a problem joining? Are you not able to see the what do you call it? Could you give me some feedback about why you're not able to join a breakout room? That would help me in the future. You can unmute and just talk to me. Tina?
That's okay. We can take them back now, I think, just because of time. Mhm.
Yeah. They'll have 60 seconds to leave the breakout rooms.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Again, we are back with the main.
Yes. And some people, they actually have another 30 seconds before all the rooms will close.
Know how I joined, ma'am. I joined back in the main group while I was discussing in the other one.
Oh, that's okay. Well, everybody will be back in about 20 seconds, Anupama. All right. Thanks, Amrita. Okay, I think everybody's back now.
Okay,
Confuses
Great.
demonstration and guidance.
What, Mr. Ramesh? What did you say?
Yes, yes, transmission is the process by which information, knowledge, ideas, and skills are taught to others through purposeful, conscious telling, demonstration, and guidance. That is a transmission, what my opinion.
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you for that summary. Yes.
Yes,
Anybody
yes.
have anything else to add? What did you discuss about the lecture? What did you remember? Maybe we can have a representative from another group. Representative from another group, maybe?
So let's see, somebody from group. Well, somebody from group 2 said that nobody was speaking in that group.
Oh,
So how about
okay.
group 1? Pramila? Can you give us a summary about what you guys talked about from room 1?
What was your understanding of the lecture that I read? What did you remember?
Or perhaps Anupama, Dr. Anupama, can you tell us?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Actually, myself, Irene ma'am, and Ramesh sir, we were in the same group, and we were seriously like we were telling about this dialogue-based thing, ma'am. So same thing Ramesh sir was saying, it is the best method which he uses in his classroom. While I was saying, like when it comes to our thing, we have to put up flow charts and all. It cannot always be a dialogue-based one. Maybe we have to go for some other way also. Like we have to put up something on the board also, flow charts and all. So always like we have to go by a blend way of teaching, ma'am. That's what I was trying to.
Those are some nice examples. Thank you. Okay. So, thank you for that.
Pramila, I'm sorry, Pramila did right. Oh, no, she did, never mind.
Okay, we're just
Okay,
gonna
I think
share.
Irene has her hand
Yes,
raised.
Irene.
Yeah, I'll just make it quick because I keep on trying to tie it into yesterday's lecture because I found it so good, you know. I found that in the transmission method, there's very little, I mean, maybe it's possible, but you know, the strategies that we learned yesterday, kinesthetic, making connections, communication is more, it's made possible through a dialogue system rather than the transmission.
Absolutely. Yes, yes. Thank you for those comments. That's absolutely true. Okay. So yeah, just to say this buzz group method of lecturing. So just to summarize what it said. Yeah, the transmission view, I think some of you have said this, students are receivers of information and knowledge from lectures and textbooks. Interaction is one way from teacher to students. And students are active participants rather in the dialogic view, and participants in the process and creating and shaping the knowledge. And the interaction is dynamic. And we heard that word yesterday from Nina, between students and between teacher and students. So yeah, thank you for that. That was a lecture aimed at you all, because this is our topic for the workshops that we're doing, but you could do this kind of a buzz group with any topic really. And the idea, the process, I'll just, run you through that. Yeah, so I have to say this works very well face to face. It's a little bit more difficult online, but we thought we would just try a very condensed version. So what you do is you divide the class into groups, and I just did this today, in fact. So I had 5 groups of students, 5 members in each group, and that was nice. And then you give the students a short prediction question or task. So I had a lecture. I was telling them about gender, their language, actually. And so I had 5 questions that I gave them. I dictated them, and those 5 questions formed the different sections in my lecture. I had 5 different sections to answer those questions. Yeah, so then you divide your lecture into 3 or 4 parts, or 5, like I did today, depending on how many questions you ask your students. And so you deliver your lecture in parts, not in one long whole. So you get them to focus on the first question and do like we did in the breakout rooms, get them to discuss it, predict what they think the answer will be. Then you read that section of the lecture, and then you get a group to summarize what they've heard or what they've understood from that section. And that's really a great formative assessment for you, just to see what they're actually taking in. Are they able to summarize what they've heard and maybe use some of the terminology that you'd like them to be noticing? Yeah. And then you just repeat that process with the rest of the lecture for how many questions you've asked and how many sections you've divided your lecture into. And the students, when you do this with them a few times and they get to know the process, it works well. But there are some challenges again with this, just as there were for the KWL chart. So benefits, very much the same as the KWL chart. It engages students, it invites predictions, and it elicits curiosity. They have a reason to listen to you because they want to find out the answers to the questions. And it motivates the students to listen and take notes. They want those answers to. And like I said, it supports formative assessment, but again, there are challenges. I find, especially, again, time management, but today, because I hadn't done this with the group before, challenges just getting the students to summarize, the willingness to do that, to verbalize in front of their peers what they think is what they think I've read. And I think it's that fear of not wanting to get the wrong answer. So I think, again, with all of these methods, there's some learner training involved and trust and reassuring the students that, you know, there aren't any wrong or right answers. We're all here to support each other and you know, try to use the language that we know to the best we can. So yeah, it's but I think in time, when you do this with students, they get to know the process, and then they find it very enjoyable. That's been my experience.
Yeah, something to add. I mean, there are variations on this style of lecture, and one is that you allow students to just discuss on their own in their groups without really necessarily publicly summarizing them. If you want to skip that step, that's totally fine. Basically, the idea is that you've given them a space and a time to absorb what you have said and to just discuss it with each other, so that the ones who are weaker in English can get something from those who are stronger, who got more information. So as you go along through kind of a lecture, the weaker ones are getting it because of those breaks and those opportunities to interact. The summary doesn't have to take place only in English. It could take place in mixed language, whatever the students are able to produce in order to facilitate understanding. So there are different tweaks, little changes you can make to this to suit you know, every sort of lecture. So the idea is to slow down a little bit for lectures like Dr. Suresh to kind of take it slowly, give students more time to absorb the key points, learn a little bit from each other, and to kind of engage them with that warm-up task to get their, you know, their knowledge out there, their experience out there, and to kind of, yeah, co-construct that knowledge, that information base. So I kind of think that's a nice way to finish today's session before we kind of, so we'll continue tomorrow with something a little bit different, but the theme is really that it's to kind of engage students, to build on their knowledge, find out what they know, help navigate their path through these sorts of lectures, either by you know, getting them to predict what's going to happen, to you know, note down and share what they know already, pre-teach some key vocabulary, get them to ask questions about what they want to know about the topic, you know, listen carefully, take notes, summarize for each other. You know, there's a kind of a theme developing here towards a more interactive lecture without making massive changes to what, you know, typical lectures already do. These are hopefully small tweaks, small changes, not wholesale kind of changes in the way most lecturers do their work. With that, I'd like to I'll stop sharing, and I'd like to invite questions. We have kind of a few minutes before our end time. So I'd love to hear, and Shannon would love to hear some of your questions on anything we've discussed today, anything you're not sure about, any comments. Over to you.
So feel free to raise your hand, write in the chat, unmute, and ask it verbally. I'll just do a brief summary of the things that maybe that will bring some questions to your mind. So this evening, Tom and Shannon talked to us about the challenges that we have for the English medium higher education group, and especially lectures. And so they have already begun to show us some visual aids, some organizers, and how to use some critical thinking skills. I really liked what they said about multilingualism being a strength in the classroom, and we don't want to diminish that at all. So then they mentioned some of the usual supportive strategies. I won't go over those, but then they talked about that what they're focusing on is implementing student-centered learning and support, meaning, negotiation, which I think you're going to talk about tomorrow, because I don't really, did you talk about that tonight?
Well, I mean, yeah, basically a negotiating meeting.
As far as negotiating?
Yeah, tomorrow we're going to focus on more visual organizers and pair work, group work, things like that, yeah, and critical thinking skills.
Okay, so I'm sorry that I must admit, I'm really interested in this idea of negotiating meaning. And when you talk about that, then do you mean like using the KWL chart or the questions that you're asking? Is that what you mean? Okay, all right, then I understand.
Yeah. I mean, negotiating meaning means kind of working out in a group what key terminology means. Yeah, so the negotiating meaning comes from the literature. It's I guess it's an academic term for.
Yeah, no, I've heard it before, and I wanted to hear your take on it. Yeah,
because I mean, yeah, I mean, it's social constructivism. We construct meanings, and rather than, I guess the idea there is rather than the teacher just saying this is what it is and this is what this is, it's students themselves constructing their own meaning and understanding of concepts. Yeah. So for example, like you know, an icon of Victorian culture, you know, what does that might mean something slightly different to the students than the teacher, and it's important for them to arrive at that understanding through their own worldviews, and so that's where the negotiation takes place. And I think that's a much more effective way of learning rather than just
absolutely
giving them his own version, her own version. Yeah,
I like the phrase you use, cultivate. We need to cultivate more partner work. And that goes right along with that negotiating meaning. They helping them to find ways to discuss. And you talked about the critical thinking questions, even raising hands. You gave some more meaning to raising hands than I initially have thought. And then of course, they talked about the KWL, the visual organizer, and how predictions hook people into engaging, and how it also enables reflection. And you talked about the challenges of both that and the buzz groups. And of course, the main two things about the buzz groups that I wrote down were how to lecture in parts and how to have questions for each of those sections. So I think while I was speaking, somebody wrote something in the chat.
Yeah, there's a question. What do you think about multilingual usage?
Yeah, I think you've talked about that, but I think I think there are many places we can use different languages effectively, and in an English lecture scenario, and I think what Tom described during the buzz groups is a great example. Instead of asking the students to summarize in English, if you share a language with your students, that's a great resource. You can do the lecture part in English perhaps, and then just maybe to make the task a little bit less demanding on them, ask them to summarize in your common language. And I think that's a great idea. And it could also help some of the less confident learners in the room to grasp the main ideas that you're trying to impart through your lecture. So and
more to Dr. Annapurna's point, kind of multilingual. So if anybody is interested in kind of some academic work in this field, there's something called translanguaging that has been kind of researched a lot recently, and the idea that language is dynamic, and we use and in a country like India, which has so many languages, so many people who speak different languages, it's a real mix of linguistic resources to communicate. So we focus not so much on speaking English or Hindi or Telugu or individual languages, but we communicate in whatever way we navigate a conversation with the participants involved. So we use all of our linguistic resources to communicate the message and to share understanding. And that's the focus, rather than, oh, now we're speaking English or Telugu or whatever else. So I think that's a really important advantage to, as we said, cultivate in a classroom, rather than to see that as some sort of a weakness or to problematize something like that. Yeah. I think
So,
Irene has
Yeah,
raised.
and Amruta
Let's
have
go.
put one in the chat, so you can take whichever one you want.
It's not a query, but it is because I teach DN and MEd. I teach in a college of teacher education. So the government of India is catching on, and they have introduced something, I guess in the West it was done a while ago. It's the concept of language across curriculum. So what happens is that, they don't leave the English only to the language teacher, but everybody should be multilingual. Like if you're coming from the state of Telangana, so the teachers are expected or required to know Telugu as well as English, and Hindi is a bonus. So in class, whereas in the past we used to say you have to speak in English, so that's the only way you'll only learn English. We're moving to this multilingual concept, where the teachers go ahead and explain the concept in Telugu or in Hindi. And we find that they are better able to grasp, and they think, and then when they answer, we encourage them to answer in English, even if it's not accurate, or if it's, I call it broken English. I say it's fine, it's all right, just like the way I speak Telugu, okay? So that helps. So it is included. This subject is included in the MEd and the BEd curriculum, language across curriculum.
That's great news, Irene. Yeah, that's really
you.
that's a nice change in kind of thinking, but it's
Oh,
quite
I'm sorry,
difficult.
I'm trying to put down my hand. So
No, that's fine. It's quite difficult to kind of mainstream that line of thinking, because there are many, even teachers are quite they want everyone speaking English, and there's a culture in our college as well that everyone should always be speaking English because that's the way to develop, and to kind of slightly shift that thinking towards using all that great linguistic resource for common communication, and then you really improve in all the languages. So there's a question in the chat. Is it better to let them ask questions after each part of the lecture, or is it better to open the questions at the end of the lecture? And I guess this refers to the buzz group.
I'm not sure.
Amruta's question
Amruta,
there.
I think she.
Amruta, is this about the buzz groups or?
In general, like what would be better?
Yeah, it depends on your goals, I think, really. Obviously, if students have questions during the lecture and you have, the time to take those, I think that's great. If they're asking you questions, that's fantastic. Yeah. Again, it depends on your goals. I always like to use questions at the beginning of the lecture, just for that prediction element to get them, thinking about what they might be listening to. So I always put the questions at the beginning from my end. But if they have questions, I think certainly, you should let them ask those questions if you've got the time to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think students should be encouraged to ask questions anytime, really. I mean, I think it's great that they want to, if they want to ask questions after each part. I think that's fine. Yeah, I would actually guess after each part, because it's fresh in their minds. They've just had it and they're not sure about something. They always say, "Oh, teacher, I have a doubt," or something. So yeah, I think it's better to. I mean, I would say after each section.
Yeah, if you do
really, if you do the buzz groups,
a nice opportunity just to invite questions after summaries, maybe.
Right.
Or
All right. Well, I put in the chat the feedback form, And please do fill that out. And we have one.